Welcome to another episode of Success is Not Normal. This week I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the incredible Craig Revel Horwood. We dive deep into his journey from a turbulent childhood to his extraordinary success as a dancer, performer and choreographer. Discover the power of discipline and why letting fear dictate your life is just an imaginary barrier. Stay tuned for an inspiring and empowering conversation ahead. Can I just first of all thank you very, very much for doing this for me? I mean, when Tom told me that you'd agreed to do this, I was on cloud nine because I've been a phenomenal admirer of yours for a very long time. So I really do appreciate you doing this. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and honor.
Okay, now the theme of this podcast is success is not normal. And the essence behind it really is to try and let people know that if they want to do anything, whether they want to be an entrepreneur, whether they want to change, that actually they have to step out of sort of normality. And that's why I'm really keen to talk to people like yourself to talk about your experiences, and hopefully then people might be able to take something from that themselves. And what I like to do, well, first of all, tell me, what are you doing at the moment?
I am playing Miss Hannigan in the musical Annie, and I'm touring the UK and their weeklies. So it's quite a grueling schedule. It's 8 shows a week. And of course, it's Monday through to Saturday with travel day Sunday. So you don't have a lot of time. So I tend to do my real life things. I mean, i.e. admin, the stuff that I need to achieve at home, like MOTs for cars, things like that. I try and get all of that arranged in a very complex diary. I think you've got to be really good at keeping your diary clean and active, in that way. And for me, it's always a challenge, and I really love that. And it's a musical that is dear to my heart. I played her and opened in it back in 2015. So that was 8 years ago. And I keep reinventing her as I go along. And that's what keeps it fresh, I think, for me. And plus the cast changes all the time. So it's always like doing a whole new show. But this is going back, I suppose, to what I used to do and what I always wanted to do and what I wanted to achieve as a kid. As I was training as a dancer, I always wanted to be in musicals. And my first musical was in Melbourne, in West Side Story. And of course, I kept doing musicals up until the age of 30, from in Australia up until 23, and then all the way up to 30 in the West End. So I wanted another challenge in life. So I became a choreographer. Then I became a director because I wanted more of a challenge. And then I wanted to have control of the whole thing. So I became a producer, director, choreographer. And now I've gone full circle back to performing again, which is great because you do tend to forget, the wonder of performing in front of a live audience. And it's just great to be back on stage.
And how long does this run for then? It sounds like a real grueling schedule.
Yes, it is. It runs up until the 25th of November. Obviously, Strictly Come Dancing, which I judge on and have done from the very beginning, May 2004, so 20 years. And I do that at the same time. So I do Monday to Friday as Miss Hannigan in Annie, wherever we are in the UK, or in Dublin, for instance, sometimes internationally. And then I travel back for the Saturday to do the live Saturday show. And then I travel on the Sunday to wherever Annie is again. So that will happen up until the 25th of November. And then, of course, I go into Panto at the New Wimbledon Theatre, which is booked 3 years in advance. So it's something I can't get out of. So everything else has to squash into the Strictly
I'm exhausted just listening to your schedule. That is definitely a schedule of a driven person.
It's a schedule of a farmer, Wilfred, I think, isn't it? You're up at 5 in the morning, and then it's 24/7, isn't it? Farming. I mean, you can't leave anything alone.
My life is not like yours. Yours seems to be really, really full of it. But let's go back. I always like to go back to our childhoods. Now, I don't know what you know about my background, but I was born in Jamaica, and
Yep.
I'm of the Windrush generation. And then I came to this country to join my parents when I was 4 years old. And I must say, if you could imagine, my parents, my mother left me with my aunts to be brought up. So when I came to this country, I had these two strangers purporting to be my parents. It took a long time to adjust to this unfamiliar circumstance of seeing snow
Mm.
for the first time. And so I always like to go back to people's childhood. So you were born in Melbourne, is that right?
I was born in a place called Ballarat, which was where all the alluvial gold was that built cities like Sydney and Melbourne. And I'm going back, over 200 years here, and it's quite famous for its alluvial gold and its gold mining, and that's where everyone was flocking to become rich. So a lot of people from England or whatever the UK would steal a loaf of bread just so they could get a free ride to Australia on a prison ship, mind you, that took 6 months, but still, to try and have another life. And of course, I was born in that town, as was my whole family. And when I did
And
a show,
just to go back then, so who went over then? Was it from Ireland, from England? Who was it on
it
your side?
was from Manchester and Essex. Two families, really, both sides, and there's three generations of my family buried in Ballarat. I had no idea of this. You have to understand until I did "Who Do You Think You Are," because I thought, well, I was just born in Ballarat, and that was a coincidence, and I had no idea that I actually had an enormous amount of history there. uh, and until I went to visit the cemetery and saw names up there that people that I was related to, they found out everything. So I was born in 1965 at the Ballarat Base Hospital. My father was in the Navy, so that's why we moved around a lot. The whole family was born there, but we always, every 2 years, as naval brats, moved, to different places. I actually started school in Fareham near Portsmouth, because that's where my father was based to do his naval training. And back in the 70s, well, the 60s actually, my father you had to do your naval training on the HMS Eagle, which is a big aircraft carrier. So I was brought up really with warships, battleships, and nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, it was a time of
Exposure.
all of that.
Well, my father would have the threat of that, and saying, "This is what you've got to do and with nuclear fallout." This, because he was coming home with all of this information, making us all as children watch these videos so we could survive.
If anything happened.
Yeah, if
But,
anything happened, I was scared to death that was going to happen. Of course, there's still a threat of that today. But
yeah, but let me just ask you: so how many brothers and sisters have you got, and where do you come in the family?
yeah, I've got an older sister called Sue, and I am the second eldest, but the eldest boy. Then there's two sisters under that, so that's three sisters all in all. And then a late arrival, and there's 12 years between us, is my little brother Trent. And because he was born in 77. So, but no one really in the family is a performer or anything or a dancer. My mum used to tap dance around the kitchen because I think, she was from a place called Lemon Springs, which is now doesn't exist in the outback, and she used to be in this dance troupe, and she did that as a teenager. And so that's as far as it goes. My grandfather, I suppose, was the most theatrical of all of the family, and that's on my father's side, because he used to ride a penny farthing through the streets of Ballarat. He was a real show-off, and he used to do magic tricks for children's parties. He'd get dressed up as a clown. He would hold, parties and local community sort of run things for children and stuff like that, which was great and a real character. So I suppose I inherited a little bit of that. I also inherited his name. His name was Revel Campbell Horwood. And then my father was Philip Revel Horwood. And then I became Craig Revel Horwood. So, but Revel isn't our last name. It's my middle name. And my father's proper name. So, but that's been down through the generations, because I thought, where does that actually come from?
Yeah.
A lady.
So what
Elizabeth.
I think is quite interesting is that, well, you're the only boy for a long period of your life
Yeah,
brought up amongst three women, your mother and then
yeah.
your two sisters, and with your father, I presume being away from home because he was in the Navy. So
Oh,
what
yeah.
was it like growing up in that sort of environment?
Yeah, well, it was all girls. I was the only boy for ages. Yeah, my mum, of course, I remember was pregnant with my third sister. And because we were a little bit older, we ended up having to, change the nappies, do all of that stuff. My job at home was to chop the wood. The girls had to do the washing up. Although I still had to get my fair share of the washing up as well. And we all had to take turns in picking the vegetables. So the carrots we grew ourselves, the broad beans we grew ourselves. It was like farming. My father was, I think, desperate to go to the land after being at sea for 20 years, and he had this affiliation with soil and everything being organic and stuff like that. Not that he meant to be, he just had a passion for it because it wasn't the ocean where you can just see for miles and there is no land. So he sort of fell in love with the land. And then when he retired, that's what he did. He just grew vegetables. I remember having to shell thousands and thousands of broad beans that would then freeze. And all of us as kids hated broad beans. We like peas. 'Cause so it was one of those, like, you don't even get the satisfaction of enjoying them, you're just
Yeah.
shelling them. But he'd put us all around the table, and
To
with the
do that. Well,
shelling, we
it
said,
sounds very similar to a story of mine because the first thing I can remember, my father had an allotment, and it was my job as oldest boy to look after this allotment. And then I had to go and pick Brussels sprouts in the winter. There's
yeah,
nothing worse than picking Brussels sprouts in the winter because it's freezing and all
yeah,
your fingers are freezing. So I've always hated Brussels sprouts because of that sort of experience. So never again. So just so I could just work out the pattern then. So your father's away at sea. He
yeah.
then retires. And how old would you have been then when he retires and then comes and lives back?
He retired when I was about, well, actually, yes, I was thir 12, 13.
About,
Because,
about 12.
yeah, because I just finished year 8 that's the second year at high school in Australia, and I was going into year 9 in high school in Ballarat, and that's when he retired, and that's why we moved back to Ballarat because we were in Sydney for 6 years. So and because he was posted to a place called Watson's Bay, which is the naval base there, and that was for 6 years, which is the longest we were anywhere because it was every 2 years. But he kept getting posting back there. But I changed school every 2 years as well. So, uh,
Mm.
so
So what was that like then, really? So every 2 years having to start again. I mean,
yeah,
what was that like as a young boy?
no friends. Like everyone talks about, oh, we had a school reunion. Oh, I wouldn't know which one to go to. You know, I would love to see some of the friends that I made. Well, you make friends in 2 years and then you abandon them. And very rarely do you keep in touch because you haven't formed, that long bond, being in the same class as someone for a matter of 6 years or whatnot. So for me, it was difficult. And I suppose that made me fend for myself and sort of put me on a really good mindset for dancing because, of course, that's a nomadic life. You're touring constantly and changing cities and changing venues and changing casts, and changing shows all the time. So for me, that seemed normal. There wasn't anything sort of abnormal about packing a suitcase and moving on.
Mm.
So I
So
think,
is there anybody from that part that time that you remember? So is there any friends at all
yeah,
you remember from the age?
yeah, there are. There's a guy called Brett Chamberlain. I remember him because we used to hang out, and that was in year 7 and year 8. We started high school together in the all boys school, and I remember him. And then on Facebook, I was trying to look up all my the people that I could remember, and I found him, and he ended up being a drag queen, bizarrely, in the movie Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I couldn't believe it. And he said, I'm in this movie, and then he was in visiting London, so we went and had a lunch together. And you know what? He was exactly the same. It was bizarre from being 12. He was just exactly the same, hadn't changed at all. So that was wonderful. And only yesterday, I found my inspirational teacher called Miss Shaw. I've been looking for. I wrote about her because in my first autobiography, and I never knew what happened to her. And then my sister Sue found her, and I've just written my first email to her this morning, which is amazing because she was the one that actually inspired me to fall in love with music and ignited my passion for music, which then in turn led to dancing and all sorts. I mean, it's because of her and her teaching and her belief in me that I am who I am today. It's incredible. And it was just so wonderful to be able to thank her because I hadn't been able to do that because we couldn't find, I didn't know her first name. I mean, how many Shaws are there in the world? And the fact that, number one, she's still alive. Number two, she remembers me because I was only literally in class with her for 2 years. It wasn't a whole sort of scenario like most people. And she was in floods of tears, she said, when she received the email. It's amazing, really, because
Yeah.
I conducted at the Royal Opera House, Act Two of Love OM. So to be able to send that video footage to her to say, look what you created, darling, a monster.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's really interesting you say that because I could remember the name of the guy that gave me my first break. His name was Jock Gallagher because I wanted to get into television, and he went out of his way to give me that break. So it begs this question: what is it about that lady in your case and your friend? What is the connection, do you think, about how they manage to have such a massive influence on one's life? What do you think that's all about?
I think because she is gifted in recognizing talent in people and who they could possibly become and encourage that side of it. Because I was terrible at math, absolutely dreadful, but I love counting to 8. But I like a 12 count bar, you know what I'm saying? But I was terrible at math. I was terrible at geography because I didn't care about it. I hated history. The only thing I liked doing in history was like I'm colouring in the pyramids, things like that. I was like, but I loved learning the recorder. I loved learning the French horn. I loved learning the trumpet. My ear loved music. And I think she recognized that from very early on and then encouraged me to perform. She was the one that got us the gig at the Sydney Opera House. Now, this is unheard of for a Western suburbs all boys school, which is rough, really rough. And the Western suburbs are always, not affluent people generally, but we went as a recorder group and played. There were only 7 of us, and she got us around Rotary clubs playing out in public, the Sydney Opera House. I mean, she really was quite magnificent. So that just ignited this passion in me, and that led, of course, to dancing and my understanding of music, which was really important to me. And it's something that I felt like she encouraged. I think inspirational teachers are phenomenal, and they can then in turn pass that on to end up teaching teachers and teaching teachers how to be inspirational, also how to see where someone's talent may lie and what to push and what not to push. If she didn't push those buttons for me, I could have ended up a mechanic,
That's really interesting. The other thing I wanted to pick up on as well is that when you went to school, you said you went to an all-boys school that is Roughs. Now, I have 2 children, and I sent my children went away to boarding school, and my daughter went to Sherborne, an all-girls school. But I sent my son to a mixed school, Bryanston, because I was worried that actually boys' school can be pretty brutal environments. What was your school like?
Well, you had to make sure you could either move from a punch. It wasn't. I think it's why I got into music so much, because I wasn't into the games. I wasn't into sport. Australia is very competitive when it comes to sport, and it's rammed down your throat. You have to do it. It's almost illegal not to play sport or football or cricket or be good at something in sport. I was terrible at sport. I was brilliant at dancing, which is even harder than some sports, but terrible at sport. So I didn't really fit in. So the friends I made were a bit nerdy and almost sort of effeminate. You know what I'm saying? Playing recorders and things like that. But we had our little posse, and we just avoided confrontation, I think, all the way through. I mean, but you know what? After doing 2 years at the all boys school, I went to my first co ed school. And that was even rougher because that was in Ballarat. And that was the 70s, where you were called really, I was called terrible names and bullied. And it was all by the girls. They were like big, butch, rolled up sleeves. It was scary. And they kept saying, thinking I was a girl because I was quite pretty as a kid. I had very long black eyelashes, and everyone said I was wearing mascara. I mean, it was just awful. They'd block the corridors and push me about. They wouldn't let me get to my locker. I mean, it was like really bad. And that's why I left. I handled 2 years up to year 10. I went, I've got to get out of here. And the way I got out was through doing chef apprenticeship at a local restaurant in Ballarat. And then I hated that. And then moved into television, bizarrely, as a trainee cameraman.
And you say, what's really interesting about all of this? It's tough. I mean, I thought that my upbringing was tough because you could imagine this, I'm from a family of 11. We lived in a 2 up, 2 down terrace house. We were very, very poor. I went to the local secondary modern school, and that was a brutal, tough environment because they didn't really educate us. They sort of policed us.
Yeah.
And I'm dyslexic. Yeah, I'm sort of dyslexic, and so the thinking was that people like us would end up in prison, and it's just really extraordinary to see. You have that tough upbringing. How did you manage to hold on to you throughout all of this sort of time?
I used to just take it and never fight back, which, on reflection and in hindsight, was not good. I should have stood up for myself, but then the fear of being bashed up was too great. And plus, they were waiting for me under the Caledonian Bridge, to bash me up before, because that's the only way I could walk home. There wasn't any other way unless you climb over the railway line, and that was illegal. So the only way for me to get home was under the Caledonian Bridge, and they would wait, and so I was living in fear all the time until we had an English class, and Miss Foster, who was our English teacher at the time, asked us all to perform a mime. Now, this was something that I didn't know I'd be good at, but I'd won the whole class over with my mime. They were absolutely loving it. And then we had to recite something, one of our favourite pieces, and I did a thing from Bette Midler's The Rose, the movie, but it was all, I learned it word for word. I didn't really know what it all meant, so I was just spouting it off, and I was saying things like, "Gonna have to find a good man, a true man, a man to love me for sure." I was doing all this, and then I'd won the class over, and then finally, I was accepted as a performer because people were laughing. They couldn't believe I just felt like I was another person when I was reciting stuff. So I also then appeared on television at the high school, and I had a camera team following me about because I'd won the junior chef competition. It was a master chef, like a master chef competition for kids, and I'd won that and won the Ballarat one, and I also won the State of Victoria title, and then I was runner-up in the nationals, that were held in Sydney. So because this camera crew were following me around, people were going, "Oh wow, there must be something amazing about this kid or whatever, this guy." And then suddenly, people were starting to accept me, and I was learning to accept myself and be myself rather than be that shy little sort of fat boy at school that was called tits.
Is that what they used to call you? Tits was
Yeah,
your
the PE teacher made me take my shirt off and run around the oval because I was apparently too fat, and everyone after that laughed at me and called me tits because my little boy boobs were bouncing up and down apparently. But anyway, so that's the reason I left school, and not only that, and that's the reason I started exercise classes because I was in the school orchestra playing the trumpet, and I was sat next to Amanda, this girl who was playing the trumpet, and she was first trumpet, I was second trumpet. And she said, "Oh, I go to these exercise classes." I was complaining about it, saying I'm too fat, and then she said, "Oh, come down on the Thursday." So I went down on Thursday, and lo and behold, they were jazz ballet classes. I didn't know that. I thought it was a Jane Fonda workout, and then the instructor said, "Oh, you're really good at this, so why don't you come back next week? And then why don't you start some dance classes and join the local theatre group, which was the Ballarat Lyric Theatre." And that's how I got into dance.
But what
And
I'm saying,
I became thin, I became tall, I became beautiful and untouchable.
the two things come together is that you would have noticed that your talents won the crowd, won the kids,
Yeah.
and then were you overweight then as a kid?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. I put a photo of it in my autobiography.
But do you recognise why you were overweight?
Yeah, because I didn't want to do any of the sports. I wasn't committed. I hated running. Every day I came last in everything. It was awful. I didn't enjoy it at all. I was, I think, eating to compensate. And plus, I hadn't grown, actually. My hormones were late. Everyone else was, growing beards, and I was still like prepubescent. And it wasn't until I turned 15 I hit puberty. So that was like way too late, in a class. So my growth was stunted for a period of time. And then I grew literally 6 inches in 4 months.
You see, one of the things I think is that I believe it's outsiders who change the world. And looking at all your experience as a young kid, you're an outsider, not being in a place for the same time, looking different and all that. So you're an outsider. That means you're not accepted by the crowd. Yeah, and you've got one or two choices in that situation, is that you either become a victim of that, or you rise above the pain.
Yeah.
And then could you recognize at what stage you started to rise above the pain?
Yes. When I won the cooking competition, I thought, I don't care what anyone else thinks. And then when I started classical ballet, I thought, well, I'm going to be called every name under the sun. The only boy in Ballarat doing classical ballet. It's sort of, but if that's not bashable, I don't know what is, because people make judgments and they think of, oh, you're a ballerina, what's all that about, and then you get called huge names and stuff. So I decided to rise above it because when I looked in the mirror and I was dancing, I flew away and I escaped any sense of the real world. And I was myself and I was free and I loved it. And it's where I was loved and nurtured. People would say, that's amazing. You're doing really, really well. I was getting corrections. I was loving it. And I was encouraged. And my teachers were fantastic. They said, you have to stick to this and you can do it. And if you're passionate, you can let all of that wash off you. And thank goodness I did.
Yeah, but it is still a courageous thing to do. I mean, you can't underestimate. How old were you at the time when you decided to go and study classical ballet?
I was 15.
That is very, very brave to do.
When I put my first pair of tights on, because I did not want to do that. I just thought, no, that's too much of a commitment. I don't want to wear the jock strap because it goes up your bum and that's like surgical. And I know it's for sport, but I didn't want to wear it. And I did not want to put a pair of tights on and go into a ballet class at all. But I just thought,
it's really courageous. What did your mom and dad think when you said, right, I want to do this?
Mum couldn't sort of believe it, really. And Dad just wouldn't entertain the idea at all. Not at all. Until later. Until it became less of a stage I was going through and more of a thought towards a career choice that I could possibly have. So, and it's not like I was doing classical ballet. I wasn't doing ballroom and Latin where it's accepted, because that's sort of accepted because you're dancing with the girl. But ballet is very much by yourself in a pair of white tights.
It's.
And
I
no
just
one,
think
no one can understand it. My family weren't classical in that way. They wouldn't listen to classical music, really. I mean, they wouldn't know anything about ballet. So for them, it was something new and odd. But because I was loving it and it got me out of the house and it gave me something else to think about apart from because my father was a terrible alcoholic and really abusive. So any escape from the family home, I was, encouraging. And so for me, I'd rather spend time at the ballet studio than I would at home, being abused by my alcoholic father. So
mm,
that sort of helped in a way to, make me
get you away from home.
start. Yeah.
When people are alcoholic, they're trying to disguise some form of pain. What was his pain, do you think?
I think he didn't achieve in his life what he wanted to achieve. He always wanted to be uh, a lieutenant commander and never quite made the stripes. And I think his drinking just got more and more excessive because of that, because he wasn't moving forward. And he always felt that because he started in the Navy when he was 18, 17, 18, and didn't have the schooling, I suppose you could say, where officers come right in. You go to a private school and you can just end, you never have to do the hard work, as a sailor. You just come in as an officer. And he was always jealous of those people that didn't do the hard graft and thought he deserved more.
Mm.
So
But you see, what's really
I
interesting is,
think it goes deeper than that, but he died before I could talk about it with him.
yeah.
So.
But you see, what's really interesting is that, in a sense, experiencing that became the driver for you, your ambition,
Yeah,
that
it
you
did.
didn't want to end up like that, didn't it?
No, exactly. And plus, I wanted to make something of myself. And I wanted to follow my passion, not something I just literally fell into. I didn't fall into it. I had to work really, really hard to become good enough to become a professional. I remember going for my first audition and I just wanted to slap myself about because I thought I was better than I actually was. And I gained enough courage to go to this audition. But when I turned up, I mean, there were guys there just, whipping out triple, quadruple turns. I just went, wow, I'm not ready for this. I need to train. I need to study a lot more, and I felt embarrassed that I even went for that audition. But that gave me the ability to want to drive myself more.
Mm.
It sort of taught me a valuable lesson to never be too big for your boots. And
But also, what you're
there's always
talking
something
about.
to learn.
But what you're also talking about is the hard work. We talked earlier on about what your schedule is, and it seemed to be really tough. But I could see where that discipline of hard work started off very, very early.
Yeah,
And
I think it's important though to be disciplined, and certainly dancing teaches you that. And you're not allowed to talk; you have to do. There is no talking in a class. You're told off, but you can't answer back. So it's very disciplined. And you have to listen to whoever's training you in that way. I mean, it'd be like, how would a gold medalist win a gold medal ever in the Olympics if they were constantly answering back and saying, oh, no, I know better? It's not about that. It's about training. It's about listening to your coach and then
mm,
having self-belief that you can do it.
and do,
You know,
so if you think about this, so you decide to go and study doing classic ballet, and then also being gay in that particular era
Hmm.
would have been like, you're really asking for it. I mean,
Yeah. I
how did
wasn't,
you deal with it?
well, I wasn't prepared to admit that, number one. Number two, I wasn't prepared to tell anyone at school that I was training anyway as a classical ballet dancer, so I kept that part secret. Um, and then I had girlfriends as well, but I knew I knew in myself that I had, that I was attracted to both sexes. So I couldn't make a choice actually early on. And it was at 18 that I was living with a lovely lady called Diane, who I'm still great friends with now. And we had a relationship for a year. And then we split up, mainly due to the fact that she fell in love with someone else at the time, her boss. and then and then and then I started auditioning for Melbourne shows and things like that, and then got West Side Story, and then I think I probably became myself, but I was still not confused. I just felt bisexual, I suppose. So I wasn't ready to commit to, oh, I am just only gay, because I wasn't. So, and that's sort of difficult, if you're attracted to both sexes. So, I mean, yes, okay, it probably ended up that I had a 13-year relationship with a guy. So that was my longest ever relationship, and that was with a man. So there you go. And now I've, I guess, committed wholly to being gay. But I'm certainly in the 70s in Ballarat, you would be what they say puffed abashed in
Mm.
Australia,
Mm.
So that wasn't, it sort of wasn't easy to actually come out and say it, even though my sisters were wondering, but then because I had girlfriends, it, I was just more, I suppose, of an effeminate straight, which there were a lot of in this country.
Mm.
Sort of lovey darlings, in the theatre, for instance, and you swear that they were gay, but they're not.
All right. It's
They're all
really
happily
interesting.
married with children. So,
Yeah. But you see, all of this sort of experience you're talking about, it is your training to get you ready for the success that you eventually had, which
yes, but
is
you don't know that at the time, do you? It's
exactly.
painful at the
Yeah,
time.
it
It
is,
really is. And you have to make big choices, and that is the hardest thing, and deal with the consequence of that choice.
yeah, and I
You
just think
know,
it is. It's a bit. It's you've got to go through that pain, and that's one of the things I'm trying to say in this
yeah.
podcast, because a lot of people, young people especially, think it's just going to happen overnight, but
It's not like TikTok,
it's
you
not
know,
like TikTok at
overnight
all.
success. But then the problem is you've got to do something with that as well.
Mm.
And you have to learn. And the only way you learn is by failing. So you have to be prepared to fail, and not beat yourself up over failures, but embrace them. I always do. Yeah, I'm so used to failing. Like when I went to my first audition, I couldn't do a quadruple turn. I could barely do a double. And when I saw that, I went, right, that's a big fail. Go and learn more. And actually, I never stopped learning, and I never do stop learning, and that's why I now put myself up for really scary challenges. Like public speaking for me was a nightmare. The thought of having to go on stage and do a speech, but now you can't stop me talking. It's really funny, isn't it? It's just confidence. But I always put myself in positions where I get nervous. I do, I did that show, Master Chef, and was runner up in the first time I did it, and then won it in the Christmas one, and then I did a really challenging show called Maestro at the Opera, which was probably the most emotional and biggest fear of mine is conducting an orchestra in Covent Garden to La Boheme, Act Two of La Boheme, which was the challenge. And that was, I don't know, that just incorporated, for me to win that challenge and actually do it, relied heavily on how I was treated as a child, my opinion on music, my knowledge of music, my knowledge of dance, my whole life in music came out through the music in the conducting. And just even when I see that back now, I mean, I'm just in floods of tears because it's just so emotional because it's drawing on absolutely everything I have learned in life to
Mm.
be able to put myself on that platform and conduct an entire orchestra and 170 people on stage,
I
but
think it's true to say it's always
I had
putting
to
your.
go through performing. I had to work on stage. I had to know the voices, singing, tenors, baritones. I mean, there is no way I could have done it if I hadn't have achieved all of that in my life already.
But it is always putting yourself in a position where it's a potential for failure, and
Oh yeah,
that's
massive.
a lot of people are not prepared to do that. They don't put themselves, so you can't really achieve success unless you're prepared to do that.
No, you have to be prepared to fly. I say if there's a cliff, you have to be prepared to jump. And sometimes you land and sometimes you fly, And if you're not prepared to go to the precipice in the first place and even contemplate it, then you'll never be successful, I don't think. You have
Okay,
to,
so people listen to this, they say, well, how could they do that? How do you get that mindset to jump?
because you can't, you have to limit your fears because there is no fear in the world. I don't believe fear exists. So as soon as you remove fear, which is only an adrenaline pump thing to protect you, from a bear or a tiger coming to get you, or survival. If you're fearless, you will then, what's the worst that can happen? You just pick yourself up, dust yourself off. So, I just think I failed. So what? Hold your hands up and try again. A lot of millionaires have lost all of their money, but they tend to get it back.
Mm,
You can lose 1 billion, but get that billion back twice over. You
mm.
know, because of attitude, I think.
Yeah.
And
Well, what I think is this: is that fear is not real. It's a
yeah,
construct. It's stories that people tell themselves.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't believe it's real. It's,
Yeah.
so as soon as I tell myself that, I think, no, go on, enjoy the music, or go on, dance. Even if you do miss a beat here and there, you can perfect it next time.
Yeah.
But you won't get on the stage or you won't do anything that you want to do or can do. I mean, I never thought I'd be able to present a TV show, but I've been asked to do that. I just thought, wow, I just think it's amazing. Sorry.
How did you come? How did you manage to do that? Just to go back a bit, you said that you won or you were a runner-up for a junior master chef. So you're a cook, so you can cook as well, then, can you?
Oh yeah, I can cook. No, I left school to become an apprentice chef because that's the only way I could see that I was allowed to be out of school. Because if you don't have an apprenticeship to go to, then you have to stay in school. So at 15 and a half, I left school and went and worked with this wonderful owner called Luigi at his restaurant called La Scala. And he took me on as an apprentice chef. And I did 6 months of it. And I just hated the backstage environment. The head chef was absolutely evil and calling me more names than you can imagine. It was even worse than school. So I then applied for a job at a TV station and became a cameraman. But yeah, I loved it. I thought I
So
had a
hold
passion.
on, hold on. But how did you go from a chef to being a cameraman? That's a big leap. It's just what was available, was it?
No, Susie Quattro was in the restaurant and eating, and a whole bunch of execs were there from B2B Channel 6. They came back to compliment me on the desserts because I was the only one. I was there from the beginning to the very end, of course, because I was the apprentice. And I was just, they said, "Are you enjoying it?" I said, "Well, I don't know what's really for me," and blah blah blah. They said, "Well, actually, why don't you come up? There's jobs going up. They're really desperate for trainee cameramen and stuff like that up at BW6. There might be something creative or whatever you can do up there." Because I told them that I dance, on my days off and stuff like that. So I went up for an interview and became a cable puller, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it because the people were different. I ended up a sound recordist on the news team, trainee cameraman, and then I went from that. And I was training all the time as a dancer, so I didn't let that stop me, my training. But that was part time, obviously, because I had to work full time, and then that's how it started. So actually, my knowledge of camera work and everything has come in handy for when I started doing TV 20 years ago
It's
because
amazing.
I know mid shots, close ups. I know all the tech. I was the first ever to use gas pedestals. So I speak to the cameraman there a lot because I've been involved in that world when I was 16,
Oh
17.
wow! So
It's in.
you
It's
so you did that. So you were behind the scenes, the scene in TV. What
Yeah.
then happened?
And then I started coming off the camera and started performing on the live variety shows. So I come off, do a number, and then go back on camera.
This is dancing, is it?
Yeah, this is me dancing live on. I mean, I've got clips of that. And then from there, I did a couple of shows for the Ballarat Lyric Theatre, and then we used those on the live variety shows. And then that was all amateur. And then I decided I'd move to Melbourne, and I was running out of money, and I was on the dole. So I thought this is no good because I left. I tried to get a job at GDV9, which is the Melbourne one. I didn't get that. And then so I thought my dad was going to kick me out of his flat and send me back to Ballarat after moving to Melbourne. And I said, I can't do this. So I looked in the paper and there was a job going for an apprentice hairdresser, and I knew nothing about it. So I went to the library, and I've got 3 books out on Vidal Sassoon and how to cut hair. And then I turned up for the interview. They looked at my hands. They asked me to try something like with the perm rod and wind. And then they gave me a job. I couldn't believe it.
Well, you see, what I
apprentice hairdresser.
But I'd say what's interesting, because it's a bit like the story of my life. Part of what you've also got to do in life is have the audacity to dream and think big. You know, you're not going to achieve anything if you're going to ask for permission. You know, you've got to be audacious. And so, again, this is a theme throughout your whole career: the capacity to be audacious.
Completely. I suppose, I wouldn't know what that word meant back then, but I guess, had the balls to go up and say, I want to do this. And it's been a passion, and it wasn't. But I was desperate. I wanted to stay in Melbourne so I could continue my dance training. So the only way I could manage that by myself was to have a job. So I was juggling the hairdressing apprenticeship with going to technical school as well once a week and doing my dance training and trying to get time off in the evenings to try and do amateur shows in Melbourne. And then thank goodness I did that. And then it came to the point in my life when I was 18 or 17 or whatever it was, very late in my 17th year. I said, right, I need to make a choice. If I'm going to go for it, I need to leave hairdressing. Can I, number one, get out of my indentures and fulfill this dream? 2, will I get a job? I don't know. Is it a gamble in my whole life? Yes, because I'll have no qualifications, but I need to do it. And I just woke up one morning and I rang the owner of the hair salon and I said, would you please release me from my indentures? Because I'd only done like a year or something, and I had another 2 years to go before I was qualified. And she said, really, you really should think about this, because yes, I know you want to become a dancer. Yes, it would be great to have a career behind you in case it doesn't work out. But I thought, no, I do not want to do this. I'm going to be a dancer. So I left. I had nowhere to live, so I stayed in someone's cupboard, and then I started teaching aerobics because I met this girl who was running a gym, and she said, well, you can teach aerobics at 6 a.m, then you'll make a 9 o'clock class. So I did that. So I got up at 5:30, went and taught all the men, power training, and then went to my ballet classes. And from there, I auditioned. I saw an audition for West Side Story, and I thought, well, I'm going to go for it. And I got the job. And from that moment on, I never stopped working in the theatre. I never realised how fortunate I was to be tall, but also, not only that, I kept my training up the whole time. So it was just incredible.
But the other thing that you did, though, is that you got rid of the safety net, because
I got rid of it. Yeah, there was no safety net.
Yeah, and I think that's also essential. A lot of people, they think it's possible to achieve your dreams and have a safety net. It isn't really.
No, you can't have both.
Yeah, and so it's a massive commitment to, it's either you swim or sink. And
tightrope walking, isn't it?
You've definitely. You then got the West Side Story, which was obviously a big break. What then happened?
Then I went on, I did another show because as soon as I joined that company, it was short lived because the closing notice went on the board as soon as I started.
Mm.
So I had 2 weeks, then I auditioned for another show, a dancing show. And I auditioned at the West Side Story because the same choreographer was trying to cast this show, and sort of just an entertainment show. And then I went on tour around Australia for a year doing that. And then I auditioned for a show called Le Cage aux Folles, and I got that. And that led to me and my girl. That led to me doing lots of TV commercials. And I was well involved then in the theatre world, and that's all I did, and I loved it. But each job, I was retraining me because I wasn't a particularly good tap dancer, but I needed to learn to tap, so I had to then go to tap class during the day, and in order to get the next job, which was a show called Sugar Babies, and they're only looking for 4 boys, but these boys had to sing, dance, act, and also be diva American style tap dancers, and that I was not. So I had to train really, really hard to get that job. And on the job, I was training as well. I was going in 2 hours before every rehearsal just to practice, 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 because I just wanted it to feel easy. But
Mm.
it wasn't easy on my body because I was so turned out and so classically trained that which was great for West Side Story, but not so great for if you're getting into the floor and tap dancing. So I had to retrain for that, but it was fantastic. But if
It
I
is.
hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have done the biggest show that changed my career, which was Crazy for You in the West End.
But,
With
but before we do that, so
right,
you were in Australia. When did you decide to come to Europe, and why did you come to
I received a call from someone I knew in Paris, and they were looking for tall boys for the Lido, and I was doing a show in Sydney at the time. The Lido used to be like, well, what they call a tits and feathers show. And you just wear a G string, basically, nothing else, or maybe a headdress, but that's sort of it, really. You have to have a really good body. And I'd been going to the gym every day because I was doing a play, playing this part of Norman in a show called Ladies' Night. And that became the Full Monty, basically. So I was in the original Australian version of that as a play, where I had to strip and I had to come on stage naked. So I had to have a really good body. And I thought, well, I've got this body at 23 because I know it's not going to last forever.
Mm.
I'll go and do an 8-month contract at the Lido. But then I did that. I left Australia, went to Paris, and I was only meant to be there for 8 months. And then I ended up getting the lead singer job at the Moulin Rouge. So I did the 8 months there, the 3 months at the Moulin Rouge. Then I got Cats in the UK tour of Cats, and then I went
Yeah,
in.
but I mean, all these things are the things that you've done. But what was it like emotionally from someone who is Australian coming
Mm.
to Europe? Did you feel like an outsider, or what was it like?
Well, I couldn't speak French, and so for me that was a whole another experience. Plus, no one there spoke English like they do now. It was like if you wanted a piece of bread, you'd have to go in and ask for it in French. So I was living the Lido life, and I was training in Australia before I went to try and learn, get my ear used to it a little bit, through tapes. And then on arrival, I just tried it. I was a nervous wreck going in and asking for my first baguette. But then I learned a different phrase like "Je voudrais une tranche de pâté de canard, s'il vous plaît." So I sort of went on to just do more phrases, and then got more and more confident and wasn't scared of failing. Even if I had said the wrong word, I'd still try it. And that's what I loved about it. And then, of course, the challenge of singing the whole show in French at the Moulin Rouge was a learning curve as well, because it's completely different. So it's all learning, isn't it? And
But it's
well,
driven. But the thing is,
I love
there is the thing about listening to your story. It's the tenacity, the drive to keep learning, to keep pushing yourself. Is that never really deciding that this is enough? It's just another step and another step and another step.
Yeah,
So
but it is because I want to learn as much as I can. I want to experience as much as I can in life. I'm not one to sit back and let things happen. I sort of like making them happen. I like challenging myself. If I can't do something, I try it again. I
Mm.
really don't give up. I mean, I nearly gave up on the toilet once because it wouldn't stop flushing, and I thought, I'm not a plumber, but I'm going to work out. I'm going to work out how this thing works, and I'm going to see if I can fix it because I'm over it.
Mm.
And I spent hours trying to fix this toilet that was just constantly running,
Yeah.
and I managed it, and I was very proud of myself.
Yeah. So you're a man that doesn't like to be defeated by anything. So
No.
you did the Moulin Rouge. What then happened?
Then I auditioned for Cats, and then I
Was
got
that
that.
Cats in the UK? Is it?
Yeah, that was in the UK. And
Yeah.
then I joined the first original tour, which happened in Blackpool. And then it went to Edinburgh, and then it went to Dublin. And the show that I wanted to get into was Les Miserables. And I auditioned over and over and over for that. But then I got down to the final two for the role of Angera. And then I didn't get it. They said, "Oh no, but we'd like to offer you a show called Miss Saigon." And then I stayed in that for literally 3 years, and then that developed my skills as a dance captain and middle management, sort of putting me very much in line for directing and choreographing. So every move I've made has helped out the next step.
Mm.
And I'd never been a dance captain, so I didn't really know what they did, until I did it, and I went, "Wow, this is like full on."
Mm. But did
And
you know that it was helping out the next step? Because that's the
no,
other thing.
no,
Is
I
that
didn't have a 10-year ambition.
mm,
I didn't say to myself, right, in 10 years, I see myself as, like a lot of people do. But no, I had no idea that I would fall in love with that side of it and be middle management. I really loved it, dealing with the dancers and the performers and the management and trying to find a happy medium in between, as a person, almost like being a psychiatrist in a way,
mm,
just
yeah.
trying to balance everyone out and make sure that information is fed beautifully through the company.
Mm.
And then that sort of led in turn to me being a resident director on Miss Saigon, the show, but only after I went off and did Crazy for You, which was what I left Miss Saigon for very little money. But I thought I need another experience now. So I went back and then improved my tap dancing again, and opened a show called Crazy for You with Ruthie Henshaw, which was amazing. And then that took me around the world really to Broadway, and then I taught the American Touring Company, and then I joined that. I went to Berlin, and then after that, Susan Stroman gave me the opportunity to put the show on and mount it in South Africa, which was amazing. And then that, because it went so well, led to Sir Cameron McIntosh phoning me and saying, "Oh, would you come back to Miss Saigon, but this time as a resident director, looking after the company and putting all the new people in?" I went, "Yeah, that'd be great." And then that in turn led to me being a choreographer in my own right. And then it just kept going, but it was following passions, I suppose, and
Which
things
is
that,
it's really interesting. So part of it is trusting uncertainty, and yeah, and uncertainty. Well, it's a bit like trusting the universe is another way of saying it. And
well,
then,
yeah.
how did Strictly come about then?
Well, Strictly, I auditioned for. I was doing my first directorial job in the West End, which was directing and choreographing a show called Beautiful and Damned. And three people had asked who is the director choreographer. They wanted someone that had won awards and all of that, and they didn't want anyone from the ballroom and Latin world because they'd already got those people. They had, I think, Lynn Goodman or whatever, or someone else from the ballroom Latin world at that stage. Then they asked me to go for a screen test, and I said, "Tell me what the show's about." They said, "Well, celebrities are going to learn to dance with professional dancers." I said, "How long have they got? 3 years, darling?" They said, "Oh, no, 3 weeks." I went, "Impossible. It's going to be a complete train wreck of a show." I said, "I'm not interested." And that was the attitude they were sort of looking for, I think. So after the telephone conversation, they invited me for a screen test. So I went up and I was looking at the monitor and just checking out who was on there. And then they said, oh, can you tell me a bit about that? I said, well, the woman, darling, whoever she is, I don't know who she is, but she can't even walk down the stairs, let alone get onto the dance floor. And I said, the boy, whoever, I said, if he's the professional, he's got the most bowed legs I think I've ever seen. You could drive a truck through that. And they said, oh, that's all a bit long. It's television. We need sort of just 10 seconds. Can you sum it up in 3 words? And I said, yes, I can. That's a matter of fact. Dull, dull, dull. And our first show was scripted, and the first 3 words out of my mouth. And then I got booed, and I was called Mr. Nasty ever since. But I gave it 3 weeks. I didn't think it would last. And so did the late, fabulous Len Goodman. He gave it 3 weeks along with me. But on that 3rd week, something changed, and people were tuning in by the millions. And it just captured the imaginations of everyone. So amazing, really.
And you were quite central, really, because I remember it's just that you were seen as the voice of honesty. You weren't there to make people feel good. You were there to be honest, even if it might be.
When I was just being myself as a director or a choreographer, give people notes and you tell them the truth because you want them to be the best that they possibly can. Like my teachers taught me. You see something in someone and you try and bring that out, but you've got to correct them.
And what do you think? What is the secret of the success of that show?
It plays on people's heartstrings and gives people hope, and it gives them a good laugh. When you've got characters like Anne Widdecombe up there, who can't but are up there trying. And that the world loves a trier. So it's just makes fascinating, intelligent entertainment.
Yeah, and I just think
there is a goal. You get to learn to dance.
Yeah, and also it gets to see human nature. Really, I think what people fall in love with is people sort of trying, giving it a go. If there's one piece of advice that you give to someone who wants to change their lives, what's that one piece of advice that you'd give them?
I would say follow your passion and your dream, and don't believe in fear. Quite simple. If anyone did that, they'd be successful.
Brilliant. Well, I really do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
And it's been wonderful to talk to you properly.
It's been fantastic, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you for squeezing us in.
You're welcome.
You have been listening to myself, Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones, or better known as the Black Farmer. This was the Success is Not Normal podcast. Stay tuned for the next week's episode.